On the morning of the 14th of March, 2011, Adaeze Okafor sat on a low wooden stool inside Mama Bisi's hair shed on Market Road in Enugu and asked the woman to take all of it. Not trim it. Take it. The scissors went in at 7:52 a.m., and by 8:10 the floor around the stool was covered in 2 years of growth she had been saving the way other women save money. Because for 2 years, that was exactly what it had been. She did not cry. She watched the hair fall in handfuls and pressed her palms flat against her knees and waited for the 11,000 naira Mama Bisi counted into her hand, note by note, twice, before she folded it into a knot at the corner of her wrapper. She did not know, walking home that morning with a scarf tied tight over her bare scalp, that the 11,000 naira she carried that day would be the smallest amount of money her son ever raised in her name. Adaeze was 29 years old that year, and she weighed 48 kilograms, 11 less than the day she was married, because for 5 months she had been eating 1 meal a day so that her son could eat 2. She had a full name that the neighbors used only when they wanted something from her. Adaeze Nkemdirim Okafor, and a son with the same surname, 7 years old, born on the 2nd of June 2003, 3 weeks after his father was buried following a motor accident on the Enugu-Onitsha Expressway. She raised him alone in a single room off Ogi Road, behind a provision store, with a kerosene stove, 2 plates, and a wooden comb her own mother had carved from Iroko wood in 1979, its teeth worn smooth on one side, from 32 years of hands running through hair before church on Sunday mornings. She wore a brown wrapper she had tied the same way every market day for 6 years, mended twice at the waist with thread that did not quite match the cloth, and a blouse she had bought used at Ogbete Main Market for 300 naira, because it still had its buttons. The wrapper was clean. She washed it every Saturday night in a plastic basin behind the provision store and hung it to dry on a line strung between 2 nails, and in the morning she ironed it with a charcoal iron her neighbor lent her. Because a woman could be poor, but a woman did not have to look poor. She smelled, most mornings, of camphor and the cassava flour she sold from a tray balanced on her head before she could afford the wooden table she used later. A smell that never quite left her skin no matter how many times she washed. Every evening, after the market closed at 6:30 and the walk home took its usual 22 minutes, she sat Emeka down on a low stool between her knees and combed his hair with the same Iroko comb, even when there was little hair left to comb, because the routine itself was the point. She kept a second small ritual that no one in the market knew about. Each night, by lamplight, she wrote the day's sales into the green exercise book in 2 columns, money in, money out, down to the last naira. A discipline she had taught herself at 16 when her own mother's shop went under for want of exactly this kind of record. She did not yet know that the same discipline, copied without her ever teaching it to him directly, would one day sit inside a spreadsheet on a laptop in an office in Bristol. What she wanted that March was small, and she would have told anyone who asked that it was small. She wanted her son registered for the common entrance examination into Federal Government College, Enugu, before the cutoff at 4:00 p.m. that day. The fee was 8,400 naira. She had been saving toward it since the previous August, in a small green exercise book where she recorded every naira that came in and every naira that went out, in handwriting so neat that the provision store owner once asked her to keep his accounts for him, for which she earned an extra 500 naira a month. By the morning of the 14th of March, she had 6,400 naira saved. She needed 2,000 more. That was the gap her hair closed. Her son's name was Chukwuemeka, though she called him Emeka, and the dignity she carried into that examination office was not loud. She did not explain herself twice, she did not raise her voice. When the woman at the front desk looked at her bare scalp under the headscarf and then looked away, Adese did not look down. She placed the money on the counter in a single stack, the small notes folded the same direction, the way her mother had taught her, because a woman who folds her money carefully is a woman who has not given up on counting it. Emeka himself was a quiet boy, the kind teachers described on report cards as attentive rather than bright, because attentive was a word a child of his background was allowed to be called, and bright was not yet. Not by people who had decided in advance how far attention like his could carry him. He did not ask his mother why other children at the gate wore shoes with both soles still attached. He noticed, the way children notice everything and announce almost none of it, and he kept his questions in the same pocket where he kept the folded magazine page, taking them out only when he was alone. The woman behind the counter at Federal Government College, Enugu, wore a name tag that said C. Ibe, Bursar, and she had been at that desk for 11 years. She did not look up from her ledger when Adese approached. She finished a line of figures, capped her pen, and only then lifted her eyes to take in order, the headscarf, the mended wrapper, and the basket on the floor with a single school uniform folded inside it. Full payment is required at the time of registration, Mrs. Ibe said. We do not accept partial fees, and we do not hold places, Adese explained, the way she always explained instead of begging, that she had 8,400 naira, in full, in cash, on the counter in front of her. She explained that her son had passed the preliminary screening with a score of 91 out of 100. She explained that she had walked 4 kilometers that morning because the bus fare would have meant 200 naira she did not have. Mrs. Ibe listened to none of it the way a person listens to information they intend to use. She listened to it the way a person waits for a sound to stop. Behind Adese, a queue of 7 other parents shifted their weight and looked at the floor, the ceiling, their own children. Anywhere but at the woman with no hair and a stack of folded money. A security guard at the gate had watched the whole exchange through the open door and gone back to leaning against the wall. It was not cruelty exactly. It was policy, recited the way policy is always recited by people who have learned that policy cannot be blamed on a person. Mrs. Ibe was not wrong according to the rules she had been given. The school had been burned twice before by parents who promised the balance next week and never returned. And the new headmaster had made full payment non-negotiable the previous term. That was the particular shape of the unfairness. Not a villain, but a woman following a line item. And a child's place in a classroom disappearing because of a gap of 2,000 naira. That no single person in that office had the authority to forgive. A teacher passing through the hall with a stack of exam papers slowed when she saw Adese's bare scalp, looked at the figure on the receipt book upside down on the counter, and kept walking. She would tell herself later that it was not her department. Mrs. Ibe stamped a new line in her ledger, called the next name on the list, and did not watch Adese leave the building. Adese tried the Cooperative Society first, walking 11 minutes to the home of the treasurer, a woman named Pauline who ran a stall 4 spaces down from her own at Ogbet Main Market and managed the savings of 19 traders. The fund had already been dispersed that month, Pauline told her, with 200 naira left in the box and a list of names ahead of her own. Adese thanked her and left before her face could do anything Pauline could report to the other traders later. She tried her landlord next, a man who collected rent on the 1st of every month and had once waited outside her door until 9:40 p.m. to do it, and he laughed, not unkindly, and told her he was not a bank. She tried the second-hand cloth seller 2 streets over, who turned her one good wrapper over in his hands, found the mended seam at the waist, and offered her 400 naira for it. not enough, and she would have needed to wear something home regardless, so she put it back over her shoulder and thanked him for his time, which cost her nothing, because she had stopped being able to afford pride that came with a price tag. By 1:30 that afternoon, rain had started over Ogie Road, the kind that came without warning in March and hit the zinc roofs like gravel thrown from a height. It was the kind of rain that soaked through cloth in under a minute, that made the Okada riders pull their machines under any awning they could find, that turned the gutters along Market Road into shallow brown rivers, carrying orange peels and cigarette wrappers past the soles of everyone's slippers. Adaize stood under the narrow overhang outside a closed shop with Emeka's hand in hers, watching the water run off the edge of the zinc roof in a single unbroken sheet, and did not say anything for 9 minutes. She had not eaten since the Akara the day before. Emeka, 7 years old, soaked to the knee, used a stick to draw the outline of an airplane in the wet sand pooling at the base of the gutter. A long body, 2 wings, a tail lifted at an angle he had clearly studied, though neither of them owned a single photograph of one up close. He had seen an airplane exactly twice in his life, both times from the school library window during the term he had spent there on a borrowed seat, both times for less than a minute, and once, in that same library, he had found a torn page from a magazine showing the inside of a cockpit, which he had folded into quarters and kept in his pocket until the creases wore through. It was Mama Pauline who found them there at 2:15 p.m., having closed her stall early because of the rain, and who pressed 2 pieces of hot akara wrapped in newspaper into Adaize's hands without being asked, and who said only, "Sit down small," before going back into the rain herself to find someone, anyone, who could help. She did not promise anything. She simply left, the way people leave when they have already decided to do something and do not want to be talked out of it by their own doubt. That night, Mama Bisi's 11,000 naira, plus Adaize's 6,400, plus a final 800 naira Mama Pauline returned with from a source she did not name, came to 18,200 naira, enough not only for the registration fee, but for the first term's boarding deposit as well. Adaize paid it the following morning at 7:45 a.m., a full 5 hours and 15 minutes before the cutoff, and watched Mrs. Ibe count it twice before stamping Emeka's file with a red ink that read admitted. Outside the gate afterward, Emeka asked, in the small, flat voice of a boy who had learned not to expect things, whether this meant he would get to use the school library every day. Adaize told him yes, and for the first time in 6 weeks, she let herself believe something fully instead of carefully. If this story is already sitting somewhere in your chest, the way it sat in mine the first time I heard it, stay with me. Because what happened on the day Emeka arrived to Resume is not the part anyone expects. On the 11th of September 2011, the day students reported to Federal Government College, Enugu, with their boxes and mattresses and new white uniforms. Mrs. Ibe called Adaize's name across a crowded hall and informed her, without lowering her voice, that the boarding kit fee, bedding, cutlery, a locker deposit, came to 2,000 naira that had not been included in March, and that without it, the boy could not be admitted into the hostel that day. Other parents nearby pretended not to hear. Emeka stood beside his mother holding a single duffel bag with both hands and said nothing, the way children learn to say nothing when they understand more than adults think they do. It was Mama Pauline, again, who reached the hall at 9:50 a.m., with 2,000 naira folded inside a handkerchief, having walked there directly from her stall without explaining to anyone why. She placed it in Adaize's hand and turned to leave before Adaize could thank her properly, and it was only outside, under the mango tree at the edge of the compound, that she stopped, set down the basket she had been carrying out of habit, and told Adizay the truth she had been carrying for 6 years. She had a son once. His name was Chidi. He used to draw airplanes, too, on the back of his exercise books, in the margins of his catechism notes, on the cement floor of their kitchen with a piece of charcoal when paper ran out, and told anyone who would listen that he would fly one someday, all the way to London, just to see what the clouds looked like from above instead of below. He had asthma, the kind that worsened with the harmattan dust every December, and on the night his chest closed for the last time, Mama Pauline had 1,100 naira folded in a tin under her bed and the nearest working inhaler, at the only chemist open past 10 p.m., cost 2,300. She had run both directions, to the chemist and back to a neighbor's house and back to the chemist again, and by the time she returned with the difference borrowed from a woman 3 doors down, Chidi was no longer breathing the way a person breathes when a story is still being written for them. He was 9 years old. What Mama Pauline told Adizay under that mango tree, in a voice that did not rise and did not break, she never repeated to anyone else, not to her husband, not to her pastor, not even, for 15 years, to Emeka himself. 15 years is 5,475 days, and Adizay counted none of them the way a woman counts days when she is waiting for something. She counted them the way a woman counts days when she is simply living through them, selling groundnuts and dried fish at the same spot in Ogbede Main Market, 4 stalls down from where Mama Pauline used to sell akara before her knees gave out in 2019, paying rent to a different landlord on a different street after the first one sold the property, and receiving, every month without fail, a bank transfer from a number she had saved in her phone, simply as Emeka, UK. The amounts had grown over the years, from £40 a month when he was a university student in Manchester to 400 when he became an engineer at an aerospace firm in Bristol, to amounts Adizay stopped mentioning to anyone because women in the market had begun asking too many questions. On the morning of the 14th of March, 2026, a black SUV with a Lagos plate number parked outside the gate of Adizay's compound on Abakpa Road at 6:40 a.m., and a driver in a plain gray shirt asked the gateman, politely, for the house of Mrs. Adizay Okafor. 40 minutes later, word reached Ogbede Main Market that a private jet had landed at Akano Ibiam International Airport at 7:05 a.m., with a single passenger on the manifest, and that the convoy from the airport was already on the expressway. By the time the convoy reached Abakpa Road, 3 vehicles, no sirens, no flags, a crowd had gathered along both sides of the street the way crowds gather for something they cannot yet name but already sense the shape of. Children who had been kicking a half-flat football in the gutter stopped to watch. A woman hanging washing on a line 2 houses down left a wet wrapper draped over the fence and came to the gate instead. The man who stepped out of the second vehicle at 7:52 a.m., exactly 15 years to the minute since the scissors had gone into his mother's hair on the 14th of March, 2011, wore no jewelry, no visible logo, nothing that announced what he had built. The driver who had parked at 6:40 stood straighter the moment he appeared. The gateman, who had been leaning on the fence eating roasted corn, dropped the cob into the dirt and did not pick it up. A woman selling sachet water nearby stopped mid-sentence. None of them needed to be told who he was. They could read it in the way the air around him changed before he said a single word. He found his mother standing in the doorway of the same provision store she had moved her stall behind in 2014, a wooden comb still tucked into the waist of her wrapper out of habit, though her hair had long since grown back. He did not run to her. He crossed the distance at a normal walking pace, the way a person walks towards something they already know will still be there when they arrive. And he said 2 words. "Mama, home." She did not answer with words. She reached up, the way she had not reached up to anyone in 15 years, and touched the side of his face with one hand. And he let her, and neither of them moved for what witnesses later described as a full minute, though no one thought to time it. Mama Pauline, 81 now and walking with a cane she did not need indoors but never left the house without, arrived 11 minutes later, having been sent for by a neighbor's grandson on a bicycle. Emeka turned, saw her in the gateway, and crossed the compound the same unhurried way he had crossed it for his mother. He did not say her name. He took both of her hands in both of his and held them, and it was Mama Pauline, not Emeka, who finally said the word that had sat unspoken between two households for 15 years. "Chidi," she said, looking at him the way a person looks at a debt finally settled, "would have liked you." Emeka did not ask who Chidi was. His mother had told him 3 days earlier, on the telephone, the night before he booked the flight. Mrs. Constance Ibe, now 61 and still working as bursar at Federal Government College, Enugu, learned of Emeka Okafor's arrival from a teacher who had recognized him from a magazine photograph 6 months earlier, and never said anything until that morning. When the convoy passed the school's front gate later that afternoon, Emeka had asked to see it. Just once, before going anywhere else, Mrs. Ibe was standing at the same counter where she had once required full payment in cash. Her hand, halfway to a stack of files, stopped in the air and did not finish its motion for several seconds. She did not speak first. Emeka did. He did not raise his voice, and he did not mention the 2,000 naira from 2011, and he did not mention the 8,400 either. He said 4 words: "No child goes home." Mrs. Ibe's hand came slowly back down to the counter. What followed was not punishment. It was repair. A trust was registered the following week under the name the school's board would announce that September, the Adaeze Nkemdirim Okafor Education Trust, covering full fees, boarding kits, and uniforms for any admitted student at Federal Government College, Enugu, whose family could not complete payment permanently, with no application required beyond the admission letter itself. In its first year alone, the trust would cover the gap for 14 children. The largest single shortfall 4,000 naira. The smallest 800. Mrs. Ibe was kept on as bursar, but her office was given a second-line item she had never had to manage before: a standing instruction that no child's name could be removed from a class list over an unpaid balance under 50,000 naira without her personal sign-off, and a phone call to the trust's local administrator first. A second fund, smaller but no less specific, opened the same month that Enugu State University Teaching Hospital, a respiratory unit for children, fully equipped, named for a boy who had wanted to fly and never got the chance. The Chidi Eze Pediatric Asthma Unit, after Mama Pauline's son, who Emeka had never met, and whose name he had only learned that week, in a room with his mother. The way some debts are paid, not because they are owed to you directly, but because someone once paid one for you that you spent 15 years carrying. Mrs. Ibe thought, on a March morning in 2011, that she was simply enforcing a line item against a woman with no hair and not enough money in front of her. But what Adaeze actually carried out of that office was never the 18,200 naira, and it was never even the admission letter. It was a son who had watched his mother fold money carefully instead of begging, who had drawn an airplane in wet sand because no one had told him yet that some dreams require capital he did not have, and who decided, somewhere between Manchester and Bristol and a boardroom in Lagos, that the capital would simply have to be built. You can shave a woman's head down to nothing. You can make her stand at a counter and explain herself twice. You can decide, on a Tuesday, that her 2,000 naira is 2,000 naira too few. But you cannot take the thing a mother hands her child before he ever owns a single asset of his own. The proof, witnessed daily and without exception, that someone will give up everything before they give up on you. That proof does not show up on a balance sheet. It shows up 15 years later, on a runway. And on the evening of the 14th of March, 2026, while Mrs. Ibe was still standing at a counter trying to understand what had just been signed in front of her that afternoon, Adaise Okafor was sitting in a chair on a veranda that had been hers for exactly 3 weeks, since the morning the deed arrived by courier with her name on it, and no note attached. A wooden comb in her lap, her son's head bowed slightly forward in front of her the way it had been bowed in front of her since he was 7 years old, and she was running the comb through hair he had not let anyone else touch since he left Enugu. Slowly, the way her own mother had taught her, the teeth worn smooth on one side. Still doing, after 32 years, exactly the only job it had ever known how to do. If your mother gave up something of herself, her time, her body, her own name in a room full of people who looked away, to make sure you had a place in a line you were not guaranteed to stand in, what is the one thing you are building right now that proves it was not wasted? Leave your answer below. I would like to read it. Subscribe if you want more stories about the people the world quietly counts out, and what they are usually counting on the inside instead. I will see you in the next one.